Just imagine this for a minute. You have been in a room full of people and felt completely alone. You're not lonely in the way that needs fixing. You're not sad in a way that needs comforting. You're just separate. Like everyone around you is speaking a language you understand perfectly, but have never quite felt at home in. You laugh at the right moments. You say the right things. You go through the whole performance without missing a beat. And then you drive home and sit in your car for a few minutes before going inside because the quiet of the car feels more honest than anything that just happened in that room. You have done that. Maybe you do it regularly. And somewhere along the way, you started to wonder whether something is wrong with you. Whether the gap you feel between yourself and most of the world is a flaw you need to fix or a fact you need to accept. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his entire life inside that gap. And what he built there changed philosophy forever. This is what he found. Chapter 1. The ones who never quite belonged. There is a specific kind of person that Nietzsche was writing for. And if you have made it this far into this video, then there is a reasonable chance he was writing for you. This person is not necessarily the smartest in the room by any conventional measure. They are not always the most successful or the most visible or the most decorated, but they carry something that is very difficult to name and very easy to feel. It's a kind of restlessness that does not go away when life gets comfortable. There is a sensitivity to things that other people seem to move past without noticing. It's something like a quiet but persistent sense that most of what the world calls important is not quite as important as the world believes it to be. This person gets along with people. They are not antisocial or difficult. What they need is the genuine connection where you do not have to translate yourself before you speak. That is rarer for them than it should be. And they have spent a significant amount of energy over the years trying to figure out whether they are too much or simply in the wrong place. Nietzsche had a name for this person. He called them a higher type. It was not in an arrogant sense. It was not in a way that places them above others in terms of worth or value, but it is in the sense that they are oriented differently. It's their values, their instincts, their way of processing how the world operates on a frequency that does not match the default setting. And Nietzsche believed that this mismatch and this perpetual feeling of not quite fitting was not evidence of damage. It was evidence of direction. Chapter 2. What the herd actually is. Nietzsche wrote extensively about what he called herd morality, and before you dismiss that as elitist philosophy from a man who went mad in Turin, stay with the idea for a moment because it is more precise than it sounds. The herd in Nietzsche's thinking is not an insult. It is a description of a social mechanism. Human beings are group animals, and groups survive by developing shared values, shared norms, shared definitions of what is acceptable and what is not. The herd is not evil. The herd is functional. It keeps society coherent and moving. Most people live inside it comfortably, and there's nothing wrong with that. But here is what Nietzsche noticed. The values of the herd are designed for the average. They are calibrated for the middle. They reward conformity and punish deviation, not because deviation is wrong, but because deviation is unpredictable, and unpredictability is a threat to group cohesion. So what happens to the person who is not calibrated for the middle? They get the message, early and often, that they are too much. They are too intense. They are too sensitive. They are too questioning. They are too serious. They are too strange. The feedback is rarely cruel. It is usually just social. You feel a slight withdrawal of warmth when you say something that does not conform to the norms. You feel a change in the room's energy when your opinion goes somewhere unexpected. You feel the gentle, persistent pressure to round off your edges and fit the shape that the group has already agreed on. And most people respond to that pressure. Because belonging is one of the deepest human needs, and the cost of resisting it is real and daily. But some people cannot fully do it. It's not because they are rebellious or difficult. It's because there is something in them that will not compress down to the required shape, no matter how long or how sincerely they try. And instead of recognizing that as a signal, they spend years treating it as a problem. Nietzsche wanted to change that. He wanted to reframe the whole thing. Chapter 3. The Ubermensch and what it actually means. Here is where the philosophy gets specific. And here is also where it gets most misunderstood. Nietzsche introduced the concept of the Ubermensch, which translates roughly as the overman or the higher man. And this concept has been twisted into all kinds of shapes over the years, used to justify things that Nietzsche himself would have found repugnant. So let us be clear about what he actually meant. The Ubermensch is not a superior race. It is not a physical type. It is not a political category. It is a philosophical direction. It describes a person who has stopped borrowing their values from the outside world and started generating them from the inside. The Ubermensch is a person who has looked at the inherited definitions of success and meaning and goodness, and asked, honestly and without flinching, whether those definitions actually belong to them or whether they simply received them by default. Most people never ask that question. It's not because they are incapable of asking it, but because the social cost of asking it is high. If you start questioning whether the values you were handed are actually yours, you have to sit with the possibility that a significant portion of your life has been organized around someone else's answer to a question you were never asked. And that's uncomfortable. So most people do not go there. But the person who feels like they do not fit in has often already been pushed there without choosing it. The discomfort of not belonging forced them to start asking questions that comfortable belonging never would have raised. And that questioning, that restless, unsatisfied, slightly exhausting questioning, is not a malfunction. It is the beginning of what Nietzsche was pointing at. The Ubermensch is not someone who arrives fully formed with all the answers. It is someone who is willing to live in the question. He is someone who has the courage to stop outsourcing their sense of meaning to the crowd and start doing the hard private work of figuring out what they actually think and value and want from their one life. And that process almost always begins with not fitting in. Chapter 4. The intelligence inside the alienation. Now let us talk about the intelligence piece specifically, because this is the part that tends to get misread. When we say that not fitting in is a sign of intelligence, we do not mean IQ. We do not mean academic performance or verbal reasoning scores or any of the ways that intelligence gets measured in conventional systems. Those measures are real, but they are narrow, and they are calibrated for the herd, the same way everything else is calibrated for the herd. What we mean is something closer to what psychologists sometimes call existential intelligence. It's the capacity to sit with large, uncomfortable questions without rushing to resolve them. It's the ability to hold complexity without collapsing it into something simpler and more manageable. It's the sensitivity to notice things that other people have learned to filter out because noticing them is too expensive. Research in psychology on a trait called overexcitability, first described by the Polish psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski, shows that highly intelligent individuals, particularly those with creative and philosophical orientations, experience the world with a significantly higher level of intensity than average. They feel more. They notice more. They are disturbed by things that the people around them seem to absorb without difficulty. And this intensity, which is genuinely a form of heightened cognitive and emotional processing, often reads to the outside world as being too sensitive, too serious, or too strange. In other words, the very thing that makes you feel like you do not belong is the same thing that makes you capable of depth that belonging often requires you to suppress. Nietzsche understood this intuitively. He wrote that the higher type suffers more, not because the world is harder for them, but because they feel it more completely. And he did not say this with pity. He said it as a description of what serious engagement with existence actually costs. The suffering is not the problem. The suffering is the price of the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is not a wound, it is a capacity. Chapter 5. What you do with the gap. So where does this leave you practically? Not referring to the philosophical aspect, I'm referring to the practical aspect that you experience in your actual life on a regular Tuesday. The gap between you and the room does not close by becoming more like the room. Nietzsche was unambiguous about this. He watched people try it, and he wrote about what it cost them. The person who compresses themselves into the required shape to gain the belonging they were denied does not find relief. They find a different kind of loneliness. The loneliness of being accepted for a version of yourself that is not quite real. What the gap asks of you instead is something harder and more worthwhile. It asks you to stop treating your difference as a deficiency and start treating it as a material. The distance you feel from the default way of doing things is not empty space. It is the space where your actual thinking happens. It is where your real values live. It is where the questions that matter to you will not go quiet no matter how much noise you put around them. The questions will just keep surfacing. Nietzsche called this the will to power. And again, it is not in the political or dominating sense that phrase has been dragged into. It is in the sense of the drive to become fully what you are. It wants you to stop apologizing for your frequency and start building something with it. The Ubermensch is not the person who conquered everyone else. The Ubermensch is the person who stopped needing the crowd to tell them they were real. And here's the thing about that kind of person. They are not made in comfort. They are not made in belonging. They are made in exactly the experience you have been trying to escape. In the car after the party. In the room where you smiled and performed and came home feeling more alone than when you left. In the years of quiet questioning that the people around you never quite understood, that is not wasted time. That is the formation. Nietzsche wrote something near the end of his productive life that has stayed with me since I first read it. He said that one must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not a malfunction in search of a fix. You are the chaos, and the star is still coming. If you enjoyed this video, I encourage you to explore my other content. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on the topic. Do you agree with Nietzsche, or do you have a different perspective? Please share your insights. Until we meet again on another subject, take care and remember that you're beautiful.